Imagine happily breezing through any book or article and rapidly finding the main points that matter. No more confusion, no more wasted hours, just pure, laser-focused understanding. And even better, you have a reliable strategy for committing those main points to memory for whatever it is you need to do, whether it's passing tests or getting a raise or a promotion at your work. You'll be able to find, isolate, and remember the points that matter. This is Dr. Anthony Metivier from magneticmemorymethod.com, and although I've literally built my entire academic career based on the tips I'm going to share today with you for finding the points in books and articles that actually matter, there was a time when I really struggled with this. I had experiences with depression and just being stressed out that made books and articles feel like impenetrable forces. They were dense, they were confusing, and filled with words that seemed to dance around the real meaning of what I was reading. And I would go through page after page and page and think, what the heck is the point of all this? And then, while I was in the darkest pit of desperation and depression that almost made me drop out of grad school, I finally cracked the code, and it happened with a number of things coming together, one of which is the memory palace technique, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but it was also just learning about how to deal with books better. And as a result, I've wound up with 2 master's degrees and a PhD in humanities from York University, and getting those degrees was thanks to being able to not just identify the main points, but use them to help me better understand a lot of details that didn't seem important, but actually became much more important because of the connections that start to happen. And I should also add that I write a lot of main points too, now that I'm on the other side of my studies. And so I've become a learning strategist for people, a person who talks a lot about memory techniques, and there's been over 100,000 copies of my books sold, and I don't share that background to brag, but rather just to express the value of the practical strategies I've got for you, because they're not just about me being a student, but also learning how to make main points stand out for readers so that they can actually put them into action. And after so many years of doing this successfully, I guess the proof is in the pudding. But I did suffer a lot in order to learn these things, and I've paid a pretty penny in order to learn them, but it's all yours free, or at least for the low cost of you listening to what I have to say, taking some notes, and also, please, go through the theory. There's a high-level theory I want you to understand, because I believe it makes all the practical processes that we're going to cover today even more valuable. And I'll admit in advance that it can seem a bit abstract, but it's a mind-blowing truth that so many students never realize because they're blinded by trying to figure out what are the main points, what am I going to be tested on, or how can I just get to the meat, as some people often say to me, where, it's just, you're saying all this stuff and so forth. Well, professors and teachers and authors of books who go on and on and on and on, they're giving you context. And this is the abstract point that I want you to understand. We live in a world where people have told us over and over and over again in the internet era that content is king. And that might be true. But context is God. And that is your power. Now, what does that mean, this abstract idea? Content may be king, but context is God. It means that reading for the main point isn't really about consuming the words that the points are contained in. It's about seeing the connections between things. But in order to do that, you need to extract those points, and you need to also get the meaning based on pattern recognition. And meaning lives in the spaces between the lines. It's in the context, and people often miss this out because they're hyper-focused on what is the exact wording, and I have to memorize all of this very perfectly and so forth. And true, sometimes you do often need the exact wording, but you've got to be able to connect the dots, and the main points aren't always in the exact wording. So let's get now into some practical strategies, starting with what we would call maybe the Memory Detective's pre-reading ritual. And I really encourage you to think like a detective. Before you even crack open a book or start with an article, try to think of yourself like an examiner or an investigator. You're looking for ways of getting the broader context. So look at the cover art of a book, for example. Read the conclusion first, and I'll suggest why in a second. Read the biography of the author. Read the preface. Look at what's called the colophon page, and then read the index before you do anything else with the book. Now, why would you do that? Well, this is one thing I learned in university and has been very, very powerful. All those things that surround the meat of a book are paratextual elements. It's a very cool word, paratextual. It's the text that surrounds the text, right? And it's a secret map to help you understand. And, well, I mean, if you just look at the book cover for Smarter, one of my own books, why do I have Moses on there? You might just discount it, but there's actually a meaning there that can help you get at the main point. And I'm not going to spend time on it now, but it's just something that's there for a reason, and it helps drive out the main point. And you can do that with many of the books that you study. And it can help create a deeper comprehension and understanding that's not necessarily in any words. So these elements help with a lot of the other techniques that we're going to talk about, the paratext. They reveal the author's intent. They give you the book's landscape. They help you save a lot of precious time by helping create a cognitive map of the concepts and the specific terminology. So I mentioned reading the conclusion first. Now, why would I do this? Well, it gives my brain typically, not in all books, but typically a roadmap to the big ideas before I dive in. It helps with deciding what chapters might be worth reading and extracting details from first, because it's a summary of the main points the author made, the big ideas, the key arguments. And it says, as I discussed in chapter 3, right? Now, you might say, but that's what they do in the introductions also. Well, yes, that's true to a certain extent. And again, it's not about every book doing this. But just as a general strategy, you'll find that in the afterword or the conclusion, there's a much more condensed reiteration or recapitulation of these key points. And it'll often say where in the book those things were covered. And that's a huge indicator. Now, if it doesn't explicitly say where in which chapter key points were indicated and where you might find the main points, that's why you also read the index at the very beginning before you read the book, because you'll see those key points highlighted or named in the conclusion, and then you can look for them in the index and skip to that point in the book, and now you have a better understanding of what the main points are. If you're loving these hacks for reading and understanding, smash that like button. I mean, literally crash your thumb down on it or your finger, whatever you use to tap, and get subscribed if you're new here. Enable notifications so you never miss strategies like these. You might think this is a little bit silly to read a book out of order, but it literally transformed how that I learn. I got through so many books so much faster because it's taking a kind of walk through the architecture of the book before reading it, and then reading the book out of order just makes it so different to the mind, and it really does highlight what the main points are, and you become like a hunter for them, which makes it so much more active and engaging and interesting. So let me know also in the comments, what are your biggest reading struggles when it comes to identifying the main points, because we can always continue this video in the discussion, and it's just a lot of fun for additional points to come up. Okay, so I just talked about becoming a hunter. Well, that's the second strategy. Basically, it's called active reading. And you want to turn each and every page into a conversation, or at least each and every page that has some important information on it, which won't be every single page. But at the same time, you don't necessarily always know. You want to just start to interrogate. Forget passive reading. You're a memory detective, right? And you want to create a dialogue with the text. And you're in an interrogation room as you read. And literally imagining things this way, you know, I've done this, but I also used to just think of a hunter. I'm hunting for the main points and literally have that mental model. So while I'm taking notes, I'm not taking notes as such. I'm asking questions. I'm challenging the author. What's the point here? Why are you saying this? And there are some things I personally never do when reading books, because this questioning process while taking notes, I don't need to spend time with colored markers for highlighting. I haven't highlighted the main points in books for really over 20 years. But what I have done is used a lot of colors for mind mapping, which is a different topic for a different day. But at the end of the day, highlighting I never do. And I almost never write margin notes either. What I do instead is literally extract onto cards. Now, this has historically been called the Zettelkasten method. It's a lot older than that. But what you do is you capture key ideas on individual cards, but more importantly, as you're doing it, you react with questions. And you can put your own ideas on the back of each card. You can put your questions and your answers to those questions in very brief words. And it's not always that important that you write them in any special way or in any tactical way that a lot of people talk about with Zettelkasten. It's the process that matters. It's the active engagement. And we know from a lot of research, both recent and in the past, that by handwriting, you're engaging way more of your brain and you're setting the stage for way more of your memory because of the physical haptic memory benefits. Now, this physical idea of writing helping set the stage for memory, it translates to the ideas that I've been talking about reading a book out of order, starting with the conclusion, moving around the book, etc. You're building also a physical haptic memory of the book in a much more profound and deep way. And so when you bring the two together, reading books out of order and drawing out your notes on physical cards, well, you're just getting so many more physical memory benefits. And you might be saying, you've strayed from the idea of finding the main point. No, I haven't strayed from it at all, because you're actually isolating the main points and you're going to remember them better because of putting them on cards, because you're also going to remember where they were in the book and where they were on the cards much, much better, which relates to the memory palace technique. Anyway, if you want to know more about how that I used Zettelkasten cards while I was in university, you'll want to check out my longer tutorial about how to memorize a textbook, and it gives you a wonderful, wonderful explanation of how less is more as well, because there's a numerical strategy to it, and I'll have the video for that in the description. The great thing about cards also is that you can move them around. Now, I do use notebooks, but the problem with notebooks is they're very linear. So my notes, when I do use that strategy, they get locked in pages that essentially mean that I'm copying a book into another book. And then I have to navigate that book in the same way. But being able to extract notes on cards means you can navigate them in many, many different ways. And this is very, very helpful and powerful because you can reorder them and you can cull out cards that you realize you don't want to memorize. You don't need them. You'll still get the benefit of having written them out because you're layering information in your mind. But when it comes to actually memorizing the cards, you could just put them away. Now, if you number your cards, you can then put them back in the order that you found them with the page numbers of the books. Now, I know there's a little weakness here, right? But you're saying in your mind maybe, well, this ebook doesn't have numbers in quite that way. Or, what about an audiobook? Or what about a video course? There are strategies and solutions for all those things in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass. But I would encourage you as much as possible to read from physical books just to get that benefit. And carrying on, ultimately, this all applies to audio and video in ways that are just very similar to page numbers. And you can then lay out the cards in the exact order you want to memorize them for placement in a memory palace. And however you indicate the order, you're going to be able to reorder your cards and then store them later. Usually mine get stored in shoeboxes. But at the end of the day, you're saving a lot of time. But the space that you're taking up, well, you're giving yourself spatial memory benefits. So it's not wasted space at all. And I like shoeboxes because they really, really give a defined, limited space for things, but I can still think about where things are spatially and get an exercise of spatial memory. When you place your information on cards and then you store them later, you're using a quasi version of the memory palace technique, and you start to think more about where ideas are in books, which gives you an additional hook. And it is very, very powerful. It's going to help you find the main points later. So please don't discount these effects. Pattern recognition magic is the next tip for you, but please understand that this might take a little while to kick in, right? Because great readers aren't just reading, they're detecting patterns, and you got to start somewhere. And the more proper notes you take, the easier it's going to become for you to recognize patterns, especially when you're committing the notes to memory. And you're looking for recurring themes, repeated keywords, and other threads that come from putting two and two together, essentially. But you need to structure your mind in such a way that you get insights. It's called the luminous detail. And the idea is that when one idea collides with another idea, a third idea is created. And it's an insight that is neither in one idea or the other. It's neither in one main point or another, but it's in the fusion of the two, or the collision, the byproduct of the collision. And that's where you're going to stand out on your exams, in your essays, and in the job market. So you want to practice finding patterns. And they're not really main points as such, but you want to wire your attention to look for aspects that you can bash together or fuse together, and they'll help you become an original thinker and just rack up more and more high scores. The catch is to get started memorizing basically the main points that you're going to find in the index, you're going to find in the chapter titles, you're going to find in the conclusion, and you're going to find by looking for where they are in the books. But you also want to read the books in full as much as possible so that you get that big picture and you see how the patterns are interwoven throughout the text. And I call it pattern recognition magic for a reason, because that's what it'll feel like. It'll feel like magic as you keep having these aha moments and you see, well, this person is saying this in these particular words, but the actual ideas or the implication of the words are used differently by this other person, but they're recurring themes. They're more similar than they are different. And this leads to the next point. In order to become really, really good at finding the main points, you want to do textual analysis. And you really want to go beyond being a detective who does interrogations. Now you want to become like the DA, the district attorney, who's prosecuting the case. Don't just read, but cross-examine. And actually, you want to be the defense lawyer as well, right? So you want to play both roles. And we've already talked about questioning, but let's go a little bit further and talk about the kinds of questions, because there's an interrogation and a prosecution and defense attorney bunch of questions that I think are really useful. But rather than just read a long list of questions, I'll place them up on the screen here, and I suggest that you search up the blog post version of this video, and I'll have infographics for you about not just finding the main points, but also the sub-points in articles on my main points article. So you can just search up magnetic memory method and main points, and it'll come up for you with all these helpful visual graphics and so forth, and you can download them. And let's carry on a bit with the memory palace technique. And I assume now that you've got main points out on index cards. You may have some index cards that have points that you don't want to memorize, but you call them out. They're ordered and numbered, so you can put your index cards back in order later. And it's time to turn these notes into an unshakable mental castle of knowledge. And you're going to first choose your memory palace. Pick a space that you know intimately. This could be your childhood home, the one you live in now, current apartment, a route you walk every day, an office, your favorite coffee shop, whatever. I use all of those things. The key is that it needs to be a space that you can think of with reasonable detail, but it doesn't have to be too much. The spatial object should be familiar enough to you, but it doesn't have to be high-definition television in your head, just enough to navigate through the rooms or from park bench to park bench or whatever. If that you can't do that, it's not suitable as a memory palace, and your main points are going to get lost in trying to wrangle the memory palace technique. So find something that is just brain dead simple, like in a room, 4 walls and 4 corners. There's no guesswork here. It's not really drawing upon your memory. It's using what's already in your memory, hence the term memory palace. The next step is to actually use the memory palace. Now, as you imagine walking through the location that you've chosen, you're going to place each piece of information on each index cards in a specific and memorable location. In other words, that location is already in your memory, so you're not spending any mental energy thinking about it. This card, card 1, goes in corner 1. The point is to get started, and you can get started. So many people have questions about this that is just answered very quickly by getting started. So let me give you a challenge that will help you do that. But first, with thanks to everyone who has any of my books, the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, and you just keep watching these videos, and I'm so grateful for that. And if you're new here, then please get subscribed and join us. Hit that thumbs up, especially if you love detailed tutorials like these. I mean, really be part of this, because the more people who have these skills, the better the world's going to get. You know, so much of us are flailing in ignorance because we don't take action on so much free information. Free has become a burden, right? So the main point that I want you to get is as obvious as I can make it. Take action, take action, take action. Action will reveal what staying still conceals, and it can conceal it forever. So please just start to take action. And in terms of finding the main points, you know, there may be other ways to do it, like talking to professors, and I've got other details on my main point article, which you can search up, and would be delighted to see you there in the comments as well. But at the end of the day, part of the test is you figuring out what the main point is, because the main point isn't always that obvious, and your teachers aren't necessarily the experts, and even your employers are not necessarily the experts. So the things that you find out, that you argue for as being important, well, that's how you stand out in this world. It's what you are able to understand, to justify, and articulate that matters at the end of the day. So don't just read. Decode. Understand by memorizing sometimes as little as possible, so that you might have a chance to reflect in your mind on the bigger picture, which is magnetically pulled along because you're willing to focus on less, being more. But you need to transform the knowledge through writing, and you'll do some of that writing by the way that you just extract very simply on these cards. Start to ask questions on the back, give tentative answers, and then discuss with others. Discuss as much as you can. Get it through the muscle memory of your mouth, and you will start seeing the main points in books faster and faster, because pattern recognition starts to switch on. Your learning skills grow, your questioning abilities grow, and you will no longer merely be consuming information. You will be digesting it and producing information of your own. You'll become a source of information yourself, a connective element. You'll be a piece in the larger puzzle of knowledge, with all kinds of luminous details flying out of your mind on a daily basis. You will be the person who has both the content owned by kings and the omniscient overview of context held by the gods. So here's your challenge. Pick a book that you've either recently read or you're reading now. Start extracting information on your cards. Do this without worrying too much about the next steps, but make sure that you have memory palaces, and there's lots of information about how to create them. I suggest the Magnetic Memory Method version so that you save time and avoid mistakes. Then rotate through your cards and the various questions that you've asked, the insights that you've arrived at during the process, and figure out what are the main points that matter the most. Then take one of your memory palaces and start encoding. If you're not equipped enough with these principles and you don't understand them yet, and I'm not forwarding the main point strongly enough, well, stick around and watch my video on the memory palace for studying next.